Bonjour à tous, hello everyone, ici Pierre Lemonde, président du Corim. Bienvenue à ce rendez-vous en ligne. Today we have the privilege to have with us the Executive Director of the UN World Food Program, David Beasley. Hello, David.
Good afternoon.
Thank you
nice
very
to
much.
Be with you.
Thank you very much for being here. Truly appreciate it. As WFP forecasts, COVID-19 will certainly have a tremendous impact on starvation around the world. To discuss it with David Beasley, we have Jean Lebel, President of the International Development Research Center. Thank you, Jean, for your presence. Appreciate it. And without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pierre. Thanks for the invitation. Bonjour tout le monde. Good day, everyone. David, welcome in this Corim video. Both of our organizations are complementary. The World Food Program is well known across the world as the organization that is on the top notch when humanitarian assistance is needed, whether it's through hunger, nutrition, resilience of community. IDRC, the International Development Research Center, is at the research end of the spectrum. We have concentrated our effort over the year with small-scale farmer. Today, we have this global pandemic of COVID-19 that is circulating across the world, where no one is immune, and where we see both organizations great concern into what's going on. So today, let's discuss what's going on, because people tend to forget that you might get sick of COVID, but if you are sick on the top of border closing, transportation limitation of food, labor shortage in the field, income reduction, you may starve rather than going out of a COVID episode. And the latest report you put together with 15 organizations, the Global Report on Food Crisis, calls for swift action. You are pointing to the fact that you are almost doubling the estimate that you made pre-COVID, from 135 million in acute food insecurity towards 265 million that are at sever level of threat of food insecurity. So, David, what are the experts in the field in your organization and others are seeing?
Jean, thank you. You and Pierre, thank both of you. But it's not good. This is one of those things that, chicken little, the sky is falling. And I certainly hope the sky is not falling. And I hope we're wrong, quite frankly. But what we're seeing is not good. Before COVID hit the scene, John, I'd already been giving speeches in Europe, especially in comments up in Ottawa and in Washington, D.C., that I was looking at the year 2020 as being the worst humanitarian crisis year since World War II. And I had a length of reasons justifying why I was very concerned about 2020. And then Desert Locust hit 4 or 5 countries, and it is now devastating potentially 1 million acres. Then comes COVID on top of this, which is just dynamically devastated in so many ways. In World War II, you didn't have a breakdown of the supply chain worldwide. You had a breakdown in war zones, but we're having a breakdown of the supply chain globally, which is impacting, obviously, particularly in especially fragile countries around the world. And you can imagine a country like the United States or Canada, where people at first were panic buying. You couldn't get toilet paper. You might not get protein like you could before. If that's happening in the most sophisticated supply chain countries on the earth, imagine what's happening in Niger or Mali or Burkina Faso or something like that. Now, so before COVID, we had just announced, we announced our numbers for 2019 3 weeks ago today, that the number of acute, as you said, acute food insecure people, 135 million people. Now, you need to understand that's not people that go to bed hungry. The chronically hungry people, that's 821 million people.
Yeah.
People who go to bed every night hungry, but not starving to death. On top of that is that acute food insecure. And I use the phrase, these are the people that are marching literally toward the brink of starvation. They don't know where their next meal is going to be. They're struggling to make it. Now, unfortunately, now because of COVID, we are evaluating the impact of COVID on money, supply chain, deterioration of economy, all the different factors that we go into of the availability of food in a particular area, and especially fragile countries. And so now that number has gone from 135 million to what will be 265 million people. Now, out of 100 million that we feed on any given day, week, or month, and you can imagine that's a massive operation globally. 30 million of those people depend on us 100%. So if we lose the money for them, and this is important because you can't take money for core feeding to give to COVID. We've got to make certain that we protect both, because obviously people don't get money, they'll die. And they won't get their food, they'll die. So if you do the math, if we lose the supply chain or the money, 30 million people, well, that'd be 300,000 people dying per day for 3 straight months. Now, we've had about a little less than 300,000 worldwide with COVID, but we should be able to address both and not have one pitted against the other. And this is why we've got to really understand how to keep the economy rolling, the supply chain moving, and we can break that down into some countries, Jean, as to what we're seeing per country that will give people a better insight.
Before, thanks for this, David, very, very clear. Before the COVID exploded, the report was highlighting, sub-Saharan Africa being the major place for food insecurity, acute food insecurity, and Asia, a little bit Latin America, a certain small fraction in Europe. With COVID, do you see changes in the trend? Recently we saw Brazil starting to bulge up. Africa seems to be lacking. What are you seeing in the field?
Well, we see that, when you feed 100 million people, if I fed everybody in your neighborhood every week for a couple of years, I know what's going on in your neighborhood. You can imagine. So we've got a pretty good feel of what's happening, because COVID brings into a whole different analysis in how we are impacted, particularly in war zones and conflict areas or extremist dominated areas, like in the Sahel, where you got Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, etc. So you can imagine we're dealing with these logistics issues all the time. We know how to overcome barriers and hurdles. We were the Ebola containment mechanism. We're in war zones. We're moving food through combat zones and front lines. So we know how to do this. But this pandemic is really dynamically impacting areas that you just would not have foreseen before. So in Africa right now, the numbers are low, but people are asking, do you think Africa may be different? And I was like, well, why do you think it will be different? It started slow in the United States. It started slow in the UK, and all of a sudden, exponentially, just boom, just shot right up, because that's how it works, so to speak, as you analyze out the numbers and the algorithms and all these types of things. I don't personally, and I hope I'm wrong, that Africa's going to be any different. In fact, I think it could be a lot worse. Some people think because it's warmer, but quite frankly, in Southern Africa now enter into the winter season. That's the Southern Hemisphere. So it's not going to be warmer there. But I'm hopeful that in the warmer areas along the equatorial area and the Sahel, the Sahara, that it will be better. But quite frankly, it's too early to tell. But we're now, I would say, in about 30 to 45 days, we going to know for sure. And so as we're working with leaders, and you got to understand, Tony Blair had called me about 3 weeks ago and said, David, what are you seeing out there short-term and long-term? And I said, Tony, unfortunately, most people have been looking at this was literally 3 or 4 weeks ago, strictly at the health impact side of the equation. I said, people aren't looking at the complete picture. What will happen with economic deterioration, with supply chain disruption, if borders are closed, restrictions at ports? I said, this has absolute dramatic impact on poor countries that are already fragile for a healthcare system. You can imagine. So take, for example, if Nairobi, if it were in a lockdown and these 20-something-year-old young people lose their jobs and don't have access to food and can't get it, you're going to have riots and protests. So we're trying to identify the hot spots first that we need to put in safety net programs and systems in place so that when you do have a supply chain breakdown, and there's a lot of other things that we're doing now, is we're trying to move billions of dollars worth of food and cash in advance of these developments.
And in your swift call to action that you put, following the release of the report I was mentioning earlier, David, you painted, quite a worrisome picture over here. And we are all, inundated by media informing us sometimes more about our own situation in US or Canada and what's going on across the world. But your call for swift action was looking at 14, monitoring system. They were looking also at, preserving the food assistance, scaling up social protection, and, securing that the local production is supported in order to feed locally the people. Is this call heard? Do you see change in the field? What has been done up to now?
Well, the response has been remarkable. It's been very good so far, but there's still a long way to go. This is not a 3-month issue. This is going to be it's obviously going to be a long-term issue, but in terms of life-saving aid, it's going to be very serious over the next 6, 12, 18 months, because the fields where farmers plant is being impacted, where they harvest is being impacted, distribution points and ports being shut down. But the response is literally in the last few weeks, I've been on the phone or whether it's on a video conference call. When I had COVID and I was kind of locked down myself for a couple of weeks, that was bad. But I think being on the video conference calls 18 hours a day is about to kill me. You're in one spot.
Me too.
But as I've been talking to leaders around the world, literally the heartfelt response is, David, we understand, we really want to help. And I understand that you first got to take care of your own people. You got to do that. You got to get your economy going. We depend on Canada for, $200 million a year. I don't want to see the goose that laid the golden egg die. Let's make sure the goose is strong for short and long term. But Canada, the United States, and Germany, the UAE, and the Saudis, and the UK, the EU, they're saying we don't want to back down. We want to help, and they are. But there's a lot more. I'm going to Washington, for example, this afternoon, go talk with key senators. I was there last week, hoping to pick up an extra $1 billion. But I'm trying to help also leaders understand, if we don't have this money, let me tell you what's going to happen. Destabilization, conflict, and the cost is going to be a lot more, as you can imagine. Now, Jean, what a lot of people don't realize, we're not just the food people. We're the logistics system for the United Nations and emergency operations. So right now we're chartering jets, 747, 737, C-130s, as you can imagine, to be transporting COVID supply, not just food. We got that system moving pretty good, but as long as the supply chain doesn't break down. But on COVID response, we have already distributed into 130 some odd countries, from testing kits, masks, PPE, gowns, ventilators, as you can imagine. We're building hospitals, 3 hospitals right now as we speak, for UN personnel, emergency humanitarian workers, so they'll have a place to go stay. In fact, I'm hoping to be down there next week in Addis Ababa at a site that we're preparing right now. So WHO or UNICEF or UNHCR, we transport the massive operations. But you also got to remember, because the commercial airlines are by and large shut down, doctors, healthcare professionals, emergency workers can't get in. And so we're having to pick up that tab. So we're talking about, over the next 9 months, to cover that worldwide is $965 million. We've got about 20% of it so far, and we're moving along. But if that breaks down, then that could be very, very, very bad.
Yeah, well, thanks for reminding everyone that, it's not only about facing the crisis, but it's maintaining also the investment for the future, because, the acutely impacted are needed to be looked at right now. But there's the 800 million people that are suffering from malnutrition and undernourishment that go hungry to bed every night, essentially. And, I fully concur with you. Domestically, we need to make sure that people are safe in our own country, but we need also to be generous and think of the future, because this problem is global. If we don't fix it globally, it will come back to us. Now, let me bring you to another track. These times are quite demanding, and for many of our organization, a first time that we see it at this global stage. What is the key learning that you're taking from this while you're in the middle of it for the future of the World Food Program? Logistically, you are the world leader. You're the best. I saw you in the field. Many of us, by the way, we're over 700 from 40 countries right now that are listening to this video conference. What is the learning at WFP level, and how this will change maybe WFP in the future?
When I got the phone call about coming and working at heading up the World Food Program in the United Nations, my first response was, "Are you kidding me? I'm not going to work for the United Nations. I like to get things done." I had this image that the UN was, a lot of talk, and boy, was I wrong about the World Food Program. They are a get-it-done operation. And, when you feed 100 million people, we're always surveying and studying and learning. And we do this all the time. So how can we be more effective when something like this happens again? And quite frankly, like most operations and organizations, Jean, most of them are having to pull out of countries now, pull the people back. Well, we don't do that. That's when we go in stronger and put our people in literally harm's way. But that's the World Food Program. 97% of our people are on the field. And I say that because we are collecting so much information and data right now per country. And as you can imagine, every country is different. And you might run into a logistics hurdle once a week in the normal operations. Right now, it's every hour. Something unique is popping up, a border closing, an import and export ban, or this port gets shut down for a couple of days. And those 2 days were the 2 days that our ships were coming in, the only distribution time for maybe 2 months worth of supplies for a country. So it can really create havoc. So this data collection, assessing and reporting to leaders saying, you can't do this. You must understand, if you do this in your country, it's not going to impact just your country. It's all going to also impact the supply chain, disrupt it, and it'll impact millions of people in the region. So this information gathering is critical, which has helped us over the many, many years synthesize this type of information so that we can be more strategic and more effective. You and I could probably spend 3 or 4 hours right now breaking that down, which would be really helpful to me because I continue to learn literally by the day. And nothing teaches you more when you're dealing with food problems in Africa, or food problems in Central America or Asia or the Middle East. It's just so unique in every place.
Yeah. David, thanks for this. We have 2 questions from our audience, and we have a few minutes still with us. So I have a person called Josiane Goupil from the Secretariat of International Adoption here in Quebec, in Canada. She's asking you, what is COVID-19 anticipated impact on children and vulnerable people, and which country are the most at risk? We covered this latter portion a little bit, but, vulnerability of children and women on this.
And this is a very important question because schools, when COVID hit, about 1.6 billion children were out of school. Well, out of that, 375 million, give or take, received school meals. Many of those children, that's the only meal they get per day. So it's one thing to keep people from starving to death. It's another thing to keep people healthy such that they have an immune system to fight a COVID or any other similar disease. So you can imagine now we've got 370 million some odd children that are at risk because they're not receiving their school meal. Now, what we're trying to do is target especially the most vulnerable children that we do general distributions. We're now coordinating with the local schools and bringing the families at a distribution point to send home rations and food or whatever it might be, sometimes cash, for these children. And out in the field where, and I say out in the field, I mean out not in a cotton field or tobacco field or bean field, I mean out where we work. How do we distribute now such that children are unnecessarily exposed to COVID opportunities that may present itself because of crowds, et cetera? So we're changing our system and how we do distancing in lines, how we distribute, and so that children and families don't have to come, out in multiple ways like they normally would have to. And I can break that down, but I don't think we have time to do that. But here, and there's a lot more to talk about with regards to women and children and what we're doing to really strengthen them. And then you get into countries like Yemen, where you already have out of 29 million people, we feed about 12.5. And you can imagine the healthcare system there is terrible.
Wow.
But the women that are very vulnerable and the children. And so we're trying to do everything we can to make certain that we reach these types of people, as well as in Syria and other places. And we're also seeing, and we don't have time to get into this, but gender-based violence is going up in many locations for a variety of different reasons. But we find that when we're there with food, it reduces tensions, not just between nations, but also reduces tensions a lot of times in households for a variety of reasons that you can imagine.
Thank you, Mrs. Gupil, for your question. Thanks, David, for this very good answer. I have another question here from Linda Bayer, Oxford University. How does the World Food Program work in vulnerable communities such as slums and refugee camps, where residents are facing a multitude of challenges in addition to the threat of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Wow. You can imagine what it's like being in a refugee camp right now. And the most powerful thing you can do is making certain that the population has enough food to stay healthy. Nothing's going to be more powerful deterrence to COVID than a healthy immune system. That's first and foremost. And number two is, because of crowded conditions, you can only imagine what we're facing. So we do, in terms of distribution of food, we do several different things: distancing and lines, and we work on that pretty hard, washing of hands and having all the sanitation things you need. But also, don't come once a week. We will now give you enough food where you can be for a whole month.
Yeah.
To the system. In a lot of places where we do biometrics with fingers, we kind of eliminate that for right touching the same. Question about how much impact that really has, but why take a chance? And so a tidbit of information with regards to that, but it's John, it's a problem out there in a lot of ways, and I wish we had time to go into all that in a lot of different countries. But let me just throw an example right now. Ethiopia, a lot of poverty, a lot of export revenues comes from tourism. Well, guess what? There's no tourism right now.
Yeah.
Remittances. A lot of countries, whether it's Lebanon or African countries like Ethiopia, depend on remittances. Well, that's dropped already 20%, and depend on those remittances. And I was just talking with MasterCard this morning about what are they seeing internally, because MasterCard visas are used for remittances. And so we're trying to analyze and evaluate that. In these slums or urban areas, as I mentioned earlier, if people lose their jobs and are locked down, because they don't, unlike in Canada, most people have food in the refrigerator, in the cabinets, they can get access to some, they have money in the bank account, they have resilience or coping capacity. The people we're talking about, they go day to day for food. And so if there's a lockdown and loss of jobs and no access to food, you're going to have true destabilization. So what we're trying to do is evaluate those spots, talk with the leaders, and say we want to come in with a safety net program. And we're trying now to advance and pre-position about $2 billion worth of food, as well as ask leaders in the donor countries to give us greater access to more monies for safety net programs. Because the last thing you want to see is a country destabilized, because I can assure you, like we're feeding a Syrian in Syria for 50 cents a day. That Syrian in Berlin or Brussels is 50 to 100 euros per day because of war and destabilization. So we need to get ahead of it. Otherwise, you have migration by necessity. And we believe that we can resolve these issues if we have the money and access, with a supply chain not being broken down.
David, you have painted, a broad panorama of the situation in the global South, and that's exactly, what we were looking at from the CORIM perspective. So I want to thank CORIM for giving us the opportunity to bring this picture of a global situation, and that the fact that, in normal time, conflicts and weather events are always there. Then you get economic shock. Now we have a health shock. We haven't talked about pests. Hopefully, the locust situation in East Africa will resolve. We have not talked about natural disaster that continue to happen. But help us to finish, on a positive note. If you had a magic wand, and you had one wish, or you were to tell this audience that we have today something that is bringing a ray of hope, what would it be?
I believe in misery, there's always a light of hope in there. But what I see out there, it's amazing how people, their hearts are resilient, reaching out to one another, caring for one another. And obviously, I want to see people fed all over the world. But seeing people come together in times of tragedy, I don't know what we're going to learn from this, but I think we'll see humanity better off for it through the suffering I wish we weren't going to have, but it is what it is. And I have found, and I know this from my own experience in North America, when the Canadian people and the American people, for example, I know when they see tragedy somewhere, they respond. And I have found that human beings are pretty much the same all over the world. We all want to help our neighbor. We all want to help the poor, the needy, and the least of these. And I'm hoping that the world will be stronger from this and be better prepared for the next time something like this hit. But in the meantime, we got to get through it with a minimum of death and starvation. And so, Jean and UNPF, thank y'all so much for allowing me to share. It really makes a difference.
Well, David, let me thank you for your time today in what is a crazy schedule as the head of the World Food Program. It has been a pleasure to have you with us today. This video will be available on both of our organization website for further streaming for those interested party. I want to thank the audience. I see on the count here 350. There was 700 registration. It's fantastic. Those word of savviness, those genuine word of savviness reminds us that we can come out of this, with better humanity. Canada is there to help. Organization like yours are there to help. IDRC is there also to support. So thank you very much for your time today, and I wish you all the best. Thank you to CORIM. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.